Whoever said that history repeats itself would certainly find proof for this statement in the history of the Vancouver Talmud Torah. For since its inception in 1918, the Talmud Torah represents years of repeated inspiration and heartbreak, joy and sorrow, triumph and failure. The same problems that were encountered 100 years ago have been encountered many times since and are still being coped with today. Lack of cooperation, insufficient funds, inadequate quarters, personal animosities, all have made the way of the Talmud Torah a difficult one. But despite all the setbacks and difficulties, there have always been community-minded individuals who have been ready to step forward and guide the Talmud Torah onward. There have been countless individuals from all corners of the community who have donated their time, their money, their support, and their hearts to Talmud Torah over the first 100 years. It's simply not possible to acknowledge them all, but hopefully this will suffice. Before the Talmud Torah, formal Jewish education in Vancouver was non-existent. In the early 1900s, the majority of Jews in Vancouver were from Eastern Europe and Russia, those who escaped the pogroms in search of a better life. In 1918, a group of parents led by Philip Tobin, Max Grossman, and Abe Rothstein planted the seeds for the school we have today. Cheder was held in the afternoons and evenings, starting with just 20 students at Talmud Torah Hall, which was part of Vancouver's first synagogue at the corner of Pender and Heatley, the center of Vancouver's Jewish community. Max Grossman purchased the lot that the synagogue and school were built on and donated it to the community. In return, Talmud Torah presented him with honorary president for life. The curriculum at Cheder was basic, mostly consisting of Hebrew and Yiddish language and Jewish history. The school constantly faced financial turmoil and a lack of enrollment. Although there were money problems, the students were thriving under the leadership of principal and teacher Joseph Youngson.
My father was a teacher there for some time. They brought him out from Saskatchewan to teach the young kids how to speak Hebrew, and my mother was there teaching immigrants how to speak English. And eventually they got married, and myself and my sister are the product of that union. And he taught there into the 30s when the Depression hit, and they couldn't afford to pay him the salary which he was getting, which was $200 a month.
By the late 20s, many of the Jews relocated to Fairview Slopes, where the original Jewish Community Center was built at the corner of 11th and Oak. This was Talmud Torah's second campus.
When you come in, the first thing you'd see to your left was a Jewish Western Bulletin. Then there was a big hall to your right, which the Beth Israel used and community gatherings used. Downstairs, I remember there were two fairly large rooms, which were classrooms for the Talmud Torah kids.
Most of us did not like the idea of even going to an after school because we finished a public school and then we'd have to schlep either by bicycle or walk or bus.
It did interfere with my extracurricular activities, which I enjoyed while I was at public school. Basically baseball and soccer and football.
The Jewish Day School movement, led by Abe Rothstein, began advocating for institutional recognition in the mid-1930s. A day school would allow students to get a full secular and Jewish education and encourage them to pursue interests outside of the classroom.
So my grandfather, Abe Rothstein, or Grandpa Abe to us, he left Russia in a very interesting way. He was smuggled out of the country by his older brother, who had had a stint in the army and knew what a terrible life that was. And Abe was about to be drafted into the army himself. And his older brother, Yisrael Abe, dressed him up as a woman and put him in a hay wagon and drove him to the border. And that's how he got out of the country. Grandpa Abe had, interestingly enough, a yeshiva education and was considered quite learned. He believed that if the Jewish community in the diaspora was going to thrive and going to remain connected to its Jewish roots, that could only be done through a vigorous Jewish education.
The Vancouver Talmud Torah Association became independent in 1934 under the Society's Act of British Columbia. In 1938, kindergarten classes opened. Its first teacher, Miss Isaacson, understood the benefits of exposing children to Hebrew education early. Regardless of the academic success of the school, it continued to struggle financially. Prominent businessman Harry Tobin was railroaded into the presidency position in 1939 by Reverend Postinsky. Tobin and Max Waterman had the talent to address the $3,000 debt.
My grandfather was Max Waterman, but he was known by everyone as Pops. When he came here, one of the things that he started to do, because he had retired from his hardware business, was to make sure that as many young people as possible could have the opportunity of a good education, which he didn't have.
The goal in the 1940s was to establish a building that Talmud Torah could call its own. But due to construction restrictions during the Second World War, this dream could not immediately be achieved. Mo Chetko took presidency in 1943, and with the help of Jack Aceman, Charlie Davis, Harry Weinstein, and Hy Altman, they were able to raise enough money to purchase an 11-room house at 814 West 14th Avenue, which served as an adequate temporary home. The cost to educate each child was approximately $6.50 per month. Tuition and community allocations were not enough to meet expenses. Fundraising was an essential part of keeping the school alive. Much of this was done by the Ladies' Auxiliary. Their work consisted of art auctions, teas, luncheons, and the sale of matzahs. The chaos of World War II seemed to unite the community behind the Jewish Day School movement. Abe and Sam Rothstein pushed ahead with the plans to build a brand new building exclusively for VTT. They went door to door, working tirelessly to raise $41,000 to purchase land from the Canadian Pacific Railway on Oak at 27th. Abe Rothstein was re-elected president of Talmud Torah, and the building plans were set into motion. Conferences were arranged between the VTT Building Committee and Dominion Construction. Preliminary estimates of the structure's cost were $75,000. Dominion needed a guarantee that they would receive the entire cost, so Abe Rothstein pledged that he would be held personally responsible for every dime. And so, construction began.
It was a gigantic undertaking, and it was led by the Rothstein family, Abe and Sam Rothstein, who owned Northwest Sack Company.
He was a driving force behind the construction of the first building, and most of the meetings took place in his living room.
On September 8, 1948, the same year the State of Israel was established, the doors to Vancouver Talmud Torah Day School were opened. Golden keys were presented to Abe and Sam for their outstanding service.
Without Abe Rothstein heading that campaign, it wouldn't have happened.
It was set up as a day school, but there was still the Hader after school. As a young kid, I was probably quite obnoxious, and I would come to school at 5:30 in the afternoon, and many times by 5:45, they would boot me out of the class. The teachers who were teaching there were mostly men who had come from Europe. Because they could speak Hebrew, they became teachers.
I remember Mrs. Trunkfeld was the first non-Jewish teacher, and we always felt, I think, that we weren't a really real school, that we weren't a real proper school because it was all Jewish. And when Mrs. Trunkfeld came, it was like, now there's a for real teacher.
And one of the first people to come as principal was Dr. Kowarski. Very interesting guy.
I would say in 1948-49 there was maybe 5,000 Jews in Vancouver. Yet within an 18-month period, they built the Beth Israel, the Talmud Torah, and the Shaar Tzedek.
The Jewish Agency in Israel initiated a teacher exchange program with Canada. 8 teachers arrived in 1957. The first at VTT was the beloved Mrs. Miriam Norton, who taught kindergarten.
My mom's name was Anita Waterman, and she was the president of the PTA for many years. And in fact, one of the projects at Talmud Torah that my mother started was the phone book.
In the olden days, the Vancouver Talmud Torah phone book was the main fundraiser for the school. Mrs. Anita Waterman and Mrs. Lami Zabarsky started the concept of the Jewish Community Phone Book in 1957. Later, it was Rita Walachow, Mrs. Walachow, who took on her shoulders the care and the organization of the Jewish phone book.
The school was a totally different school then than it is today. And the school was always operating with a shoestring budget. You had to have socials, you had to have barbecues, Sunday barbecues, you had to have concerts. And you know, every time you held a function, you raised $200 or $300. Wasn't enough.
Talmud Torah was dealing with financial difficulties in the 50s due to the fact that most families couldn't afford to pay full tuition. The depth of the school's financial stresses were not exposed until 1954, when the president and the co-president of the board abandoned their positions, leaving a massive debt to the bank. In response, the largest gathering of VTT supporters was held under the request of acting President Sid Zak and acting Vice President Joe Siegel.
The Talmud Torah had an emergency. They were going to close their doors. They needed $85,000. And we looked at what was then called UIA, or United Appeal, and they always gave us a grant. And I remember very clearly one individual who is dead now standing up and saying, "When are we going to get these monkeys off our back?"
Thousands of dollars were raised by Sam Rothstein in the Clear the Debt campaign. The Zionist organization, the synagogues, the Jewish Community Council, and the United Jewish Appeal all stepped in to help, but it wasn't enough.
We were the means to their end.
Then, VTT's most trusted and loyal leader, Abe Rothstein, passed away, leaving a mournful community to deal with the issue unguided. The bank formally demanded that all VTT endorsers pay them back, or else the school would be forced to close. In the years immediately following, Talmud Torah merely survived by the skin of its teeth. In the decade after the Second World War, Vancouver's Jewish community exploded, with immigrants from Europe, from Russia, but also from Eastern Canada and the prairies.
When Leon and I first moved here, and we enrolled our children at the Talmud Torah, we were asked by friends here in the city, why? They said, "Why would you send your children to the Talmud Torah? It's for the greener, the immigrants, the refugees that came from the war." And to us, it was a very peculiar kind of a reaction. Many of those same people that asked us those questions have subsequently put their grandkids into the school, I'm happy to say.
In the year of 1959 and 60, there were still an awful lot of children who were children of newcomers from Europe. So we decided that what we should have is uniforms, because this would make it more uniform, because some of us came with our children, my little daughter and all her little beaux, and some of the children barely had clothes.
Facing a huge yearly deficit because of the economic chaos of the 50s, the famous Burn the Mortgage campaign in 1962 successfully ended years of financial turmoil. The campaign got off to a tremendous start due to the fundraising efforts of Pops Waterman and a new generation of supporters.
My father, Dr. Adam Bogoch, everybody knew him as Al Bogoch, got involved in Talmud Torah just as soon as he came to Vancouver in 1952.
Dr. Bogoch was Mr. Talmud Torah. And the legacy that he left for the rest of us of his level of activity and volunteerism and fundraising and everything is really something that I believe that the board members have to live up to.
I felt those years at Talmud Torah were extremely special. I learned a lot about my Judaism.
It served as a very strong and familiar foundation upon which to build further, more advanced knowledge.
It was a terrific academic base. I mean, I didn't realize it at the time, but it really prepared us. I think that the dual curriculum prepared you for the academic rigors of, our future education.
We moved to Vancouver when I was 5 in the summer of 1959. And next thing I know, my mother has got me in the what was at the time the auditorium of Talmud Torah, and there's a whole bunch of kids there in a kindergarten just about to go down for nap time, and I'm holding my mother's hand, and she's like, "Here, please take him. I can't stand him anymore." And 7 years later, she picked me up. Alan Putterman shaved his eyebrows one day. That's one of the funniest things I ever remember from Talmud Torah. Nobody knows why. I don't think Alan knows why. It wasn't all beautiful and shiny as some people like to remember. Yeah, no, I got smacked. No question. I mean, holy cow, when you think about it nowadays, can you imagine somebody taking a ruler to a kid's hand?
You could often find a piece of chalk flying your way.
We went through times in the school where we had some pretty cruddy teachers. Teachers that would teach by ridicule, by almost physical intimidation, and those are bad years.
I loved Mrs. Mallon. I just loved her. She would read to us. I remember all the books. She read Charlotte's Web to us, and I remember at the end when Charlotte dies, the spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't read it, and that even the boys cried.
Mr. Isidore J. Levy,
who was an Englishman, who was quite strict and very prim and proper. He always wore a suit and a tie and often a vest, was kind of stiff.
I used to say, I am just going into the office to have a little mumble with Mr. Levy.
One of the reasons my parents were so keen on me attending Talmud Torah was because my grandmother was teaching there. And by the time I was of age to go to Talmud Torah, she was already a legend. My grandmother was Gita Krohn. She came from Europe. She was Lithuanian and survived the Holocaust with her husband and my mother. My mother's sister, Tamara, was killed in the Holocaust. She'd been a lawyer in Lithuania before the war and realized that really wasn't a transferable skill. And so she went back to school and became a Hebrew teacher.
She would teach her children with love. She would bribe them with love.
I think some of my favorite memories, and I still have, are my challah covers and things that I did with Mrs. Krohn. I thought she was amazing.
She had a particularly soft spot for other immigrant children and really looked out for them. I think her own experience of coming to Canada was so traumatic. She was dedicated to Jewish food. I wouldn't say she was a great chef, but one of the things that she actually made, which was delicious, was her strawberry jam. And so for years, she would make her strawberry jam and package it up and give it away as gifts to people. But it was always part of alliance building. And at some point, as she got older, that was just too much for her. She didn't have the energy to make the jam. So this has been a family secret, so that I'm divulging now, that she would go to Safeway and buy strawberry jam and repackage it in her little pots and continue to go out and alliance build.
Some of the best memories I have at Talmud Torah is junior congregation.
This is where most of us learned the decorum in a synagogue, how to read Hebrew, how to do the prayers.
We had a choir master by the name of Murray Kennick, who was an opera level singer, very, very talented guy, a little bit nuts, but very talented. And we would get together and every single Saturday morning at the school, and we would have our own little service, which was conducted by the grade 6s and 7s.
We dressed up, we sang, We tried not to fight, and we made harmonies when the time came. And the sounds are still resonating with us.
And then, of course, after the service, we all would go for Kiddush. I remember apple juice and a big sugar cookie on every single plate. I mean, those are just kind of really fond memories.
There wasn't adequate strength in the office of the principalship and the leadership of the school itself, and I became aware of a very promising young principal in San Francisco area, I think it was Palo Alto, named Pinky.
And then at the beginning of grade 5, Pinky Buck came in. And for me, that spelled disaster. It became so religious. You know, what used to be fun, I used to love going to junior congregation on Saturday mornings, all of a sudden just became really onerous, really not fun. There was so much prayer and so much rigidity. And I left after 6 weeks. I was really, really unhappy with that transition.
Junior congregation was part of the glue, one of the most important parts of the glue that held the student body together. But when Pinky Buck came to Talmud Torah, he ended junior congregation.
Pinky Buck was the greatest. He changed the whole fabric of Jewish learning in Vancouver.
He brought with him all the talent, ambition, charm.
He also turned children on to Orthodox Judaism, which was perfectly fine so far as we were concerned. We weren't in any way intimidated by it, and it didn't bother us. What did bother us was the fact that if a child chose not orthodoxy, that child was made to feel inferior. And that was two sides of a coin. I liked Pinky very, very much, and I liked a lot of the things that he brought to the school. But then there was the other side, that if you weren't Orthodox and you happened to go to the Beth Israel for the morning minyan rather than the Talmud Torah, it was frowned on. But meanwhile, I would say his days were good days, by and large.
Student enrollment increased to over 250, creating a need for expansion.
I got to be appointed building chairman. I didn't volunteer for it, I just got appointed.
I was on the board of Talmud Torah, worked on the building committee with Leon Glassman, and spent many hours with him trying to perfect economically in a feasible building.
Money was very scarce. Nobody had any real money to speak of.
When they built the first expansion of the school, my grandfather was the honorary chairman, and Dr. Bogoch and my dad headed up the campaign, and at the dedication, they honored my grandfather.
When we got a good, beautiful building built, I think it was one of the best, nicest schools around for that time, including the public schools. And I'm very happy with what I accomplished and can help to contribute to the Jewish community.
We had a Talmud Torah Foundation, and that started with a dinner at my house.
Vancouver Talmud Torah Foundation was built on the principle that no Jewish child who wanted an education should be turned away from that education for the inability to pay.
Next to the home, Jewish education is the best way of helping to preserve and perpetuate Judaism. And when 50% of the children in the Vancouver area don't receive any form of Jewish education, that's, as they say in Jewish, a shanda. It's a terrible thing.
And it did evolve to the point of where the size of that foundation was important to Talmud Torah in the formative years of Talmud Torah, where it provided income to subsidize students that couldn't afford to pay.
The 70s marked the arrival of a VTT legend, a young Malaysian UBC graduate named Eric Lee. He taught for an astonishing 4 decades.
I thought Eric Lee, Alav Shalom, was an amazing teacher.
Eric had his public side with his students and parents. He didn't put up with a lot of stuff. He didn't come across as warm and fuzzy, but you will find a lot of students who had a deep connection with him and his sense of humor.
He actually bought me a garbage picker-upper, like a little garbage claw with my name on it, because I would get detention with him so often.
You have to know that Eric was the teacher the children were most terrified of in grade 4 and 5. Yeah. They used to come to me and say, "Mr. Lee in 6 and 7, Mr. Lee." And I used to say to them, "But you will love him the most."
He fell ill in the last year of his teaching. You know, he was going to, his big dream was we weren't going to give him money for a retirement present. He was going to get a dog, and he was going to spend his years walking his dog through the North Shore Mountains. And he never got to see his retirement, which makes me really sad because he planned and saved for it for a really long time. He made a lot of friends here. We all miss him. And the fact that I'm in his room now is kind of crazy. I think he'd laugh.
Though many staff members who began teaching in the 70s and 80s taught at the school for decades, their early years proved difficult.
When I arrived in the school, the collective agreement was such that Vancouver Talmud Torah teachers were not paid anywhere near public school teachers.
We pushed, and then finally it got to a point where nobody was listening, so we said, we're going to have to do a full-day walkout.
I was actually in the front page of the Sun together with Margot Carter, maybe Sharon too. We were holding posters in Hebrew. It said Yom Mecha'ah, protesting for equal pay, for wanting to have the same rights as Vancouver School Board.
We've been lucky to have settled collective agreements. It's taken sometimes a little bit longer than usual, but we've always come to consensus at the end of the day. When I arrived there was a teacher in the gym, and I think that teacher was teaching or running games and activities, and but what I wanted to do is I wanted to go one step above that and actually pull a curriculum together. So since then, that curriculum is stuck.
Our grade 7 Strathcona trip, when I think about, those formative experiences where I started to understand relationship dynamics and what to do if things aren't going right.
Jill Davies and I created the program. We worked together on it. So it's been around for 30 plus years. It's a grade 7 project. It was basically pulled together to be an outdoor education experience for the students, and it's evolved way beyond that.
When I started at Talmud Torah, we actually had a live-in janitor. When they decided that funding or economics didn't allow for a live-in, they converted his apartment into my classroom. I had a stove that had been shut off at the source years ago in the kitchen. It was a wonderful place to keep posters and things.
One year we needed some electrical work done, and the electrician went and turned on all the breakers, which then turned on the oven, which then started a fire. I ended up emptying 3 fire extinguishers.
At that time, our school was still affiliated with an Orthodox umbrella organization called Torah U'Masorah, and I think that was seen very much in our curriculum.
I felt sometimes, because of my upbringing, that we were trying to make Talmud Torah a little too religious.
Upon reflection, I realized that I felt as though Judaism was really being shoved down my throat in a way that was too aggressive. It was too much praying and Torah, Bible study. I didn't connect to it. I'm sure some kids did.
We stopped our affiliation with Torah Masorah, and for me, I think that's when things started to change.
The religious kids, when the school was not religious enough for them, they started, Rabbi Fierstein's wife started the Hebrew Academy, and these kids all left and went there.
The vision was we're now a community day school. Before, I don't think we were seen so much as a community day school. We were an Orthodox day school. But once Hebrew Academy was meeting that need, we became more community-wide.
The school came back to the more middle-of-the-road kind of school, which I think the parents liked.
In the 80s, the tuition was approximately $2,700, and only 40% of families paid in full. Enrollment was on a steady rise to just over 300 children. Class space was needed again, so portables were purchased to house the students. The need for expansion arose again during the 80s when new classrooms were added, and then again in the 90s with the addition of more rooms and a brand new gymnasium. The lead donors for the third expansion were the Wask family.
Referred to as the new gym auditorium was built. There was a large gathering of people, and I remember Dr. Adam Bogoch stood up and pulled out an envelope. He said, "In this envelope is the check that will pay for this building." And of course, Al Bogoch and my father were best of friends. My parents were major donors for Talmud Torah, major supporters, major proponents for high standard Jewish and secular education.
With an upgraded facility and a larger parent body, the direction of the school was challenged.
There was a rogue board that was being assembled to come in because there was a lot of parents at the time that were very unhappy about the direction of the school.
Up until that time, the board recommends a slate to be voted on, and most of these people are usually elected. What we decided that we would have our own slate. The AGM was a memorable AGM. Usually at annual general meetings, you get 20, 30 people show up. We had 500 plus people show up at our annual general meeting. Well, we had a lot of support from the parent body. We got a lot of negativity from some of the senior people that had been involved in the school, particularly people on the Talmud Torah Foundation. And this was brought to a head on Yom Kippur at an Orthodox shul in Vancouver, where the rabbi made the theme of his Yom Kippur speech to advise his congregants to watch what we were doing and possibly try to get rid of us because we were leading the school to ruin. There was a great group of really committed people on the foundation, even if they disagreed with some of our methods. I didn't question their integrity or their desire for a healthy Jewish goal.
The one issue that really they came in to accomplish was the principal at the time was believed to be ineffectual, which I happen to agree with.
The principal, in addition to running the school, was running the Judaics program, but he didn't have enough time to properly supervise it. We eventually did hire a teacher to be head of Judaic studies. At the same time as Rabbi Dulu, we hired a non-Jewish principal, and the fact that he was Jewish or not wasn't the issue. The fact that we needed somebody that was familiar with the education system and knew how to run a school, basically.
I don't think anybody thought I would convert people to Catholicism, but they were uncertain the degree to which I would understand and enhance the Jewish ruach in the school. When I arrived there, the moms got together and they did a kippah for me, which was a welcoming kippah, and they gave me a book about how to be a good Jewish mother. The interesting thing about being an administrator of the Talmud Torah was that you enter a flow between the staff, the parents, and a board, which arguably was a very difficult balancing act. And at the time that I entered, there had been a disruption of regular understandings between these groups.
To some extent, we were running the school, which was certainly not the job of a board. Ideally, the job of the board should be to hire the principal, let the principal and the vice principal look after the school.
These were good and decent people. They were doing their very best for that school.
Hugh Burke. He was only here for 3 years. The impact he had on me, I'm surprised by that.
Florence Lapidus and Myra, I chose them to help me out as vice principals. They were phenomenal.
What was nice for me was that I had a half a day still working with the kids and a half a day in the office.
One of the custodians, when I first started here, her name was Pedro. He was like this young, handsome, Brazilian guy, and all the girls and all the students were like crazy about him. And we were having an assembly, and they were singing O Canada, and I was sitting up by the kindergarten, and I noticed they weren't singing True Patriot Love. The whole grade thought it was True Pedro Love.
In terms of my kids, teachers, Colette Leeson stands out as not only a brilliant art teacher, and I think she had an enormous impact on our youngest daughter, but also she was an incredible math teacher.
I'm a teacher now, and something that I always tell my students is something that I quote from her is that there's no mistakes in art.
Patty and Gilda, when someone takes your baby, because they're babies in preschool 3, and takes them all morning for you and teaches them Aleph Bet Gimel and ABC and 1, 2, 3 and how to socialize, how can you ever thank teachers for that?
The fact that we had so many different administrators, it took a lot of energy because there were always new programs and new visions.
I think what happened, because we had so many changes in leadership, the staff became a very united group of teachers because we were the constant.
The school had been shrinking for quite some time in population, and in an attempt to attract more kids, they had not been increasing the price of tuition. So as a result, their finances were getting more and more dire. They were getting less support from the community. They had alienated a lot of their historic supporters, both organizationally and private, and their expenses were going up. We then went out and talked to a lot of the parents who were paying full tuition to explain to them that this is a community and that yes, in effect, you are paying for other people's tuition, but that's what it means to be part of a community. And our commitment to you is we will not waste that money. We brought in Kathy Lowenstein and Donna Palmer-Dodds as a dynamic duo.
They brought such energy and enthusiasm.
Kathy and Donna were together for, I think, about 5 years. They changed the culture of the school as far as the teaching staff. It was a sad day when Donna Palmer-Dodd's husband got transferred and she had to leave us. And we're lucky, we still have Kathy Lowenstein, and Kathy has put together a team that is phenomenal.
As we improved the finances of the school, we made sure that the teachers benefited because the teachers were not getting a proper pension.
And you can't send them out after a 35-year career with $300 a month. And that happened.
The school had spent all of its savings, so we put back, I believe, $1.5 million into savings so that there would be an endowment in the end that was completely untouchable, that would have money that would be available for future generations. That too is a double-edged sword, because when you leave large pots of money behind, often people will find it and start to spend it.
It's always a struggle between the Judaic content and the secular content, where we're trying to do everything that a public school does in half a day and also complement with the Judaic content, the Hebrew content.
Sari Weintraub taught the way that I believe Talmud Torah kids should be taught. She took the themes of of what they were learning in Judaics in grade 7 and built them into the secular curriculum.
I'm a teacher myself, and I hope that I can have that same impact on my students. When I think about what I want to emulate and who I want to teach like, she's it.
I think Talmud Torah owes her an enormous debt because she put the MVP program the way it is in place, which is the shining star of Talmud Torah.
It was started by Sari Weintraub, and she had the vision for it.
She's just this incredible woman.
She was one of the best things that ever happened to hundreds of students. Children loved her, but better than that, they came back and said, I've never learned anything in English comparable to what I learned in 7th grade. And she used to say that to them. You will get, this is what you're going to learn in 10th grade. And they would. She's amazing. It's a beautiful and terrible memory of having her not here for a lot of reasons.
The same way that, someone might have, social studies or math after lunch or after recess, we had a class on how to repair the world. The role that we have as Jews to be a light onto the nation.
We prepare them to be leaders of our community. We prepare them well to do that job. And as our students grow in the grades from preschool to grade 7, they take on so many leadership and chesed activities that they take with them authentically as they graduate.
Over the years, I developed a very strong connection with my students teaching Hebrew. And from that connection, I started developing a new love, which is getting kids to be involved in leading the school in chesed initiatives. By giving it to them, they're starting to develop this ownership.
Us leading them and making the Jewish community a better place is just so important because, in the future generation, then the Jewish community can grow and evolve into a warm and loving and generous community that evolves around chesed.
2 years ago, we had the opportunity to collaborate with a Muslim Ismaili school and with a Catholic Christian school. And the idea was, what if we learn about others and they learn about us? And what if we start a generation that before they develop the wrong idea about others, they will get to know them on a personal level. While we're learning about homelessness, I invited a homeless man to our classroom. And he had the opportunity to tell the students about his life. And the silence in that room was something that I still can visualize. And when he left, we had a reflection session and we talked about, remember what we thought of homeless people? And now that we know his story, how do you feel about homelessness? There was an unanimous understanding that once you hear someone's story, you may be less judgmental.
The world is built with kindness, and I think that starts here with us doing kindness around the school.
I see every day the passion and the energy and the love that the teachers and the leadership team and the janitorial staff and the security team, they put into my children. They put into our community's children.
It's not recognized how hard teaching can be on the spirit. At the end of a particularly spectacular lesson, there's no adults around to witness what you've done. It's a very solitary endeavor. The teachers now are firecrackers. They're amazing. And I hope they find the same kind of home that I found here.
None of the incredible programs that VTT has to offer would run as efficiently without the countless volunteer hours of the parents.
I was involved in some leadership roles while I was part of Talmud Torah. I helped to put on the major events like the galas and the gentleman's dinner.
I find that we have parents making connections, parents I see who join the school who don't know anyone, who in a very short period of time are embedded in the fabric of the volunteerism or the life at the school in ways that you never would have seen coming, and now it's like you can't imagine them not having been a part of that school forever.
For the first 10 years of my tenure here at Talmud Torah, we were simply making do with a very crowded space.
Talmud Torah had a very aging infrastructure. The 1948 building really wasn't great to have kids in there.
I was teaching in the old wing, and in the middle of the lesson, the rain started coming and the water started dripping through the ceiling.
Believe it or not, one of the biggest challenges that we've always had is that in a school of approximately 500 students and 90 staff members, there's no place to park. And Safeway parking just didn't cut it.
And it became clear to Kathy, as well as the school's leadership team and the school's academic team, that in order to deliver on the best of 21st century education, we needed a better physical plan.
The latest initiative, the new facility, is a fantastic success story.
I know that we wouldn't have gotten to the $20 million goal without Harvey and Jody being part of that fundraising team, and Jody being my co-chair.
The new building now, it's magical. It's just a first-class job.
The term 21st century learning is being tossed around quite freely these days, but we really put it into bricks and mortar there. It's much less formally restrictive than it was, and that kind of flexibility is going to pay dividends for decades to come.
The library has like a reading room and like all the computers, and we get our own laptops. Like we have a lot of privileges here that not a lot of other schools have.
We actually built an underground parkade, a joint parkade with the VTT and the Beth Israel under the property of the Beth Israel Synagogue. And the parkade was the first piece of the project that was finished.
Just recently, we had the story of Vancouver Talmud Torah opening its brand new building. And that is a milestone. And if you look back throughout the 85-year history of the newspaper, you will see many other milestones that Talmud Torah has undertaken, but you will also see some of the issues that have occurred over the years as far as financing or enrollment, and how the community has either risen to those challenges or hasn't. It's important for the community to read, because if they don't know that there's something wrong, if they don't know there's a problem to fix, it won't get fixed.
We were running at a balanced budget for many years until we built a new school. We built a new school, we had additional expenses that were essential to continue to make the school survive. We're now struggling financially, but I believe that when we finish paying for this school, when we create endowment, we're going to be able to have the balanced budget we seek. But we can't do it without community support, broad community support.
The Talmud Torah was the kind of institution where you never turned anybody away. It wasn't for the rich, it wasn't for the poor, it was for everyone.
That socioeconomic diversity really is a gift to you when you're in elementary school, I think, because you learn values of tolerance and understanding, some humility, because you see some pridefulness and you see how hurtful it can be.
We have about 37% of students that are receiving some form of tuition assistance. This is something that some people say, well, we shouldn't promote, we shouldn't be telling people. I think we should scream it from the rooftop.
We need the community support to pay for Jewish education, because it's not just our school that benefits, it's the entire community that will benefit from that education today and tomorrow. There's a ripple effect that goes throughout the entire community for years and years to come.
The diversity we have already is wonderful. Economic diversity, religious diversity, ethnic diversity, geographic diversity. It's amazing. We have families from Brazil, New Zealand, Australia, Hungary, Belgium, France, the UK, all over the US, all over Canada, obviously Israel, Argentina, Mexico. It's amazing how many other communities can boast that kind of demographic at their school.
One of the great things about the Talmud Torah is it causes us to consider what it means to be Jewish within a range of understanding, within the multiplicity of identity.
Talmud Torah kind of provided me with the backbones of a Jewish identity, but also allowed me to have that space to create my own.
I always looked at it as part of a team, part of a tribe. We are all either atheist, agnostic, reform, egalitarian, conservative, orthodox, ultra-orthodox, and all different flavors of ice cream, all different colors of the rainbow. We make up a large tribe with different needs and different desires.
Not only to me is Judaism learning about our history, but it's learning about yourself and exploring yourself. Because I think Judaism brings out different qualities about yourself, if it's giving to the community or it makes you like a better person. You can also just be making that one friend who helps you in your life.
When I see other people like Jeff Gelfer or Eddie Lewin or Ricky Cohen or anybody in the community, there is a bond.
When you have good people around you, you hold on to them. And we were fortunate. We were a really solid group and we've stayed in touch with each other. We're in each other's lives.
What makes it so special is that when we think back on our friendship, we can go as far back to when we were in kindergarten.
When those kids go through Talmud Torah, they become friends. And many of them stay lifelong friends through Talmud Torah. And that's very, very important. That's the cohesion in the institution. That's the future. The school today has a responsibility. Now you have the physical structure. You got the building. And the greatest, most beautiful building in the world isn't worth a damn if you don't inhabit it properly.
Talmud Torah has to be a Jewish school for Jewish kids because the Jewish values of respect, tolerance, standing up for yourself, not bullying, not allowing discrimination of Hebrew and Israel and Jewish tradition. This is what makes a Jewish school, and these are the values that we really want to expose kids to.
Part of running a school of excellence is wanting to improve continuously. Two initiatives that we're involved in this year is firstly, being accredited through the Canadian Accredited Independent Schools, which is the Gold Star seal for independent schools throughout Canada. The second thing we're involved in with the support of Federation is how do we recruit more families to the school? No longer is it about the Oak Street corridor. It's about recruiting families from further south, from further east, from the North Shore. We want to bring them in because we know for sure that once families come to our school, they want to stay.
Every year we see these graduates come out with strong Jewish identity, good scholarship, and that's the real investment we make in Talmud Torah.
Assuming that Talmud Torah is providing what they should be providing, sending a child to Talmud Torah is making an investment in that child's future and in the community's future.
Talmud Torah feeds the JCC, it feeds JFSA, it feeds Louis Breyer in terms of giving, in terms of supporting, in terms of awareness, in terms of using facilities. So this is such an important asset to the community.
If my grandbabe could see the school today, he would be amazed and he would be thrilled.
I'm most excited about the new generation of families that I see at VTT. They volunteer enthusiastically, they give generously, and they have fabulous values.
It's perfect because we're not on the small side, but at the same time we're not on the big side, so you don't feel overwhelmed.
You need to have a Jewish school in every community to teach the children. That's absolutely imperative.
You know it's successful when you see them coming back to school as parents. They bring their own children to Talmud Torah because they want them to have the same experience or a better experience and to have the foundation of Judaism.
I guess the biggest thing I can say is that the Talmud Torah, and I see the product currently now, and my grandson Jack and my granddaughter Ava, I can't ask for more. I believe that we have to have this school, and the product that comes out of this school is outstanding.
The fact that it's been around so long, to me, is amazing. And that they're still around, to me, is a testament to not just the school, but to the entire community who has kept the school functioning.
If you really think about what the true foundation of Talmud Torah is, I believe it's the planting of these seeds of friendship and community, of Israel, of Torah, of values, of service, of global citizenship, of the particular Jewish way and the universal global citizen. And this is the true foundation, is within the heart, soul, and minds and actions of each student. Naturally, it takes economic, financial support to run institutions in this world. It's ever more increasingly challenging.
But with the support of many of these major donors, they're giving people like myself and other young professionals the opportunity to build a school. And without them, we wouldn't have a building. We wouldn't have it without the Diamonds. We wouldn't have it with the generosity of the Glassmans and the Siegels.
Joe Siegel has been a huge pillar of our community and the community in general.
Mr. and Mrs. Rosemary and Leon Glassman are the finest example of supporters of Talmud Torah. When they were parents at the school, they gave their time and they gave generously and they helped to build the school to what it is today. And they have come back again now to repeat that generosity.
The Diamonds and the Diamond Foundation is something like I've never seen before. The whole attitude that they bring of really looking very far down the road into the community and where the community should be decades from now is an attitude that I don't encounter anywhere else in the city.
It always takes an individual that has beyond the call of duty dedication to keep the glue together in an organization. So if it wasn't for a Bob Waterman or an individual such as Al Bogoch, this thing wouldn't have happened.
You give what you can when you're young, but it shouldn't end there. You should continue to grow as a person and as a philanthropist or, community member.
We look to the affluent families in Vancouver to make their large donations to the school, but every donation, whether it's $1 or $1 million, is an important donation to the school. There's one story in particular that my dad told us around the dinner table. A man who was fighting as a partisan in the Second World War was ordered, he and his group of fighters, to blow up a German munitions train. And his group successfully blew up the train, and upon inspecting the train after it had blown up, looking for something of value, whether it was food or whether it was something they could sell or use, they realized it wasn't a German munitions train. In fact, it was a train full of Jewish children. And this gentleman could never get the memory or the vision of those Jewish children out of his mind. He moved to Vancouver, actually he moved to Coquitlam, and was not part of the Jewish community at all during his life in Vancouver. He ran a small shoe cobbler store, a shoe repair store, never married, never had children, and upon his death willed the Talmud Torah his estate, which turned out to be a significant savings and a huge donation to the Vancouver Talmud Torah. He could never get over the fact that he had destroyed Jewish children's lives. And he wanted to make sure that the Jewish children of today and the future would have a place to learn where to be Jewish.
We are really just stewards. We are following in a long line of people who have dedicated and given so much to VTT and so much to the community before us. Whether it's Rothstein, Pastinsky, Tobin, Waterman, Bogoch, Wask, Siegel, Diamond, Glassman. These are people who sat around the same table that we did, faced those same challenges. How do we ensure we have a strong and vibrant VTT for our children and grandchildren?
It had very modest roots, but its longevity is driven by its modesty, I think, and its awareness of where it came from, and its willingness to accept its faults and understand that it needs to continue to maintain its focus forward, but also looking backwards.
Whoever said that history repeats itself
would certainly find proof for this statement in the history of the Vancouver Talmud Torah.
For since its inception in 1918,
the Talmud Torah represents years of repeated inspiration and heartbreak,
joy and sorrow, triumph and failure.
The same problems that were encountered 100 years ago
have been encountered many times since,
and are still being coped with today.
Lack of cooperation, insufficient funds, inadequate quarters,
personal animosities.
All the midway of the Talmud Torah is sometimes a difficult one.
But despite all the setbacks and difficulties,
there have always been community-minded individuals
who have been ready to step forward and guide the Talmud Torah onward.
And guide the Talmud Torah onward.
And guide the Talmud Torah onward.
And to guide the Talmud Torah onward.
And guide the Talmud Torah onward.
And guide the Talmud Torah onward.
And guide the Talmud Torah onward.
The Talmud Torah
onward.
And guide the Talmud Torah onward.